Hello and welcome to Cartsburn Publishing. My name is Vincent Gillen. Let us take a walk down a little street in Greenock. It is one of the shortest in town today, but it tells a long story. This story will take us from Kintyre to Greenock, to Virginia, to Mobile, Alabama, to South Carolina and Pennsylvania, to the West Indies and back to Liverpool, Greenock and Glasgow. We will talk about mahogany, tobacco, cotton, emigrants, housebreaking, runaway servants, French invaders, American privateers, John Paul Jones, gun batteries, customs cutters, the Catholic Church, slavery, American Revolution, the Peninsular Wars, Waterloo, steam engines, James Watt, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, steam locomotives, and we will end up at the Beatson Oncology Hospital in Glasgow. Quite a journey, and all from an obscure piece of land in Greenock. This is the story of Virginia Street. The Scots had been trading legally with the American colonies since the Act of Union in 1707. It was the very reason for the growth of Port Glasgow and Greenock, bringing tobacco, coffee, sugar and cotton back to Britain in return for British manufactured goods. Local merchants had got very rich through this trade, and many had set up businesses in the American colonies and used their family ties with ships' captains in Scotland. The Reverend P. Slaughter of the Episcopal Church in Virginia, when visiting Scotland in 1849, noted, "When we were in Scotland, exploring the sights of Glasgow, its great commercial metropolis, it was not her vast factories with their columns of smoke mingling with the clouds, it was not the busy Brumela vocal with the hum of commerce, nor her broad avenues of polished stone, the mansions of our merchant princes, that had the greatest attraction for us. There was a short and narrow street on whose walls were inscribed Virginia, and no Virginian who has not been in a foreign land can tell what power there is in that name to stir the soul. We gazed at it as at the face of a familiar friend, and our thoughts went back like lightning along the electric telegraph of memory to our native land. We took pleasure in recalling every link in the chain of history which connected the place in which we stood with the spot where we were born. We listened with interest to an intelligent Scotchman who related anecdotes of the days when Virginia merchants thronged that street and were regarded with such respect that other men gave way that they might pass. We refer with pride to the beginning of the 17th century when our ports were thrown open to Scotch adventure, and Glasgow becoming the great entrepot whence the farmers general of France derived their supplies of tobacco from Virginia, received her first impulse towards that high state of prosperity she has since enjoyed. And we acknowledged with gratitude the compensation she had made us in the persons of her energetic sons, who formed so important an element in our population and had illustrated our revolutionary and commercial annals. The Reverend Slaughter could be equally referred to Greenock's Virginia Street. Colonial tobacco and cotton was landed in Greenock and then sent up to Glasgow or re-exported to France. Our Virginia Street wasn't named, however, as a general reference to the trade, but as a reference to the house built here called Virginia House. You can just see it at the bottom of the map here beyond Chapel Street. It was built by Roger Stewart, originally from Kintyre, who had viewed the ground here in 1789, and it was his relationship with Virginia which gave the name to his house and then to the street where his house sat. A subtle difference. So, just to set the scene again, in this talk I will show you how Virginia Street has changed over the years and talk about the people who lived and worked here. It was in fact a lot longer than it is today, and today, as shown previously, it's approximately where the red line is on this map. Compared with the map of 1842 on the left, this image shows all that remains of Virginia Street today. Prior to the East India Harbour being built, Virginia Street ran down to the open shore, where two rocks called the Murrows were situated. You can see here also the site of the gun battery at Fort Jervis, dated 1796. We are now looking north past the East India Harbour over the Clyde, and to our left is the Custom House and the west breast of the Greenock Harbour. From the mid-18th century, Greenock took over from our neighbour Port Glasgow as the chief port for ships from Virginia loaded with tobacco and cotton. So close was the connection between it and that colony, which was then somewhat unhealthy, that it was frequently remarked that there was scarcely a family in town but had some relative, a father, son, brother or cousin, buried in a Virginian grave. This trade continued to increase until the outbreak of the American War of Independence, when it was diminished to a considerable extent. Virginia Street originally extended south and was intersected by Chapel Street. And you can see the house marked as Mr. Stewart's on this map of 1818. Beyond the house is Mansion House Street, which of course led to the Mansion House in the Well Park. This area was removed when the railway came to Greenock in 1840. So who was Roger Stewart? Roger Stewart, son of a minister in Arran, was one of those ship's captains who traded with the North American colonies. He was born in 1744. When moving to America, he was initially based in Portsmouth, Virginia, shown here, but came to Greenock at the outbreak of hostilities in 1776. Greenock was expanding rapidly and becoming the centre for trade, and he became magistrate of the town in 1795, which reflects the character of the man and played a significant role in the development of the town. He was a director of the Clyde Marine Society, a charitable society for the relief of sick, worn-out and decayed shipmasters, officers and mariners, and their widows and dependents, from Glasgow, Port Glasgow, Greenock and Crawfordsdyke. So where do we first find his name in the archives? Roger Stewart wrote several reports to the local newspapers on the state of the colonies in 1776 and how safe it was to trade there. He wrote about how the Americans were deployed and, of course, the nature of the battles that took place. He then turned to privateering and was quite successful. It was a way of making large sums of money, but one obviously which had a high degree of risk to health and wealth. One Greenock merchant would fit out 3 ships to fight, and they were all captured. And of course, all this was to maintain his business and his trading relations. The letter here is just one of the letters which he wrote back. Greenock ships were crucial in bringing news of world events, but especially at this time which threatened the prosperity of the town and the country. Mr. Maclean formerly sailed in the Caledonia belonging to Greenock, which ship was taken by an American privateer on her passage home from one of the West India Islands, loaded with sugar and carried into Boston. Here, rather than continue in confinement, he engaged himself on board a coasting vessel bound to Charleston, where he afterwards engaged himself in the ship now brought into the Clyde. As these places, he was informed that great preparations were making at Virginia in fitting out a fleet of 25 ships, who were expected to be ready to sail in March, loaded with tobacco for France, under convoy of one Manley, who was to have the command of 3 ships of war, and that, when he left Charlestown, a small vessel had just arrived there from Virginia, who brought intelligence of 7 of the above fleet being fully loaded and ready to sail, waiting only for the rest of the fleet, who were daily expected down the different rivers in order to join them. This is quite valuable information, I would guess. As stated, Stuart himself took an active role in the campaign against the rebellious Americans, no doubt with a certain self-interest. He armed his crack ship, the Defiance, originally fitted out by a Captain H. Dundas Beatson of the Naval Service, as a letter of marque mounting 32 guns. If successfully captured, American or French ships could be sold for large sums of money and their crews ransomed, but it came with a high degree of risk to health and wealth. On the second day after leaving the Clyde as convoy to a fleet of merchant ships, the Defiance fell in with and engaged off the coast of Ireland the United States frigate Wasp of 72 guns. After a gallant fight, the Defiance struck, being on fire fore and aft. The Wasp was disabled from pursuit of the merchant fleet and was easily captured the next day by a British frigate of the same calibre from Cork. According to George Williamson, Stuart's son, John, father of the Church of Scotland at Liberton, was a youth in the Defiance when captured, and delighted to tell how the gallant Captain Athol fought his ship against such heavy odds. John Paul Jones, the Scottish naval captain, took up the American cause when he was living in Virginia, and soon he was at sea threatening the coastal towns of Scotland, Ireland, and England. He would become known as the father of the American Navy. As an interesting aside, John Paul Jones was once in business with Archibald Stuart, the son of Sir Michael Stuart of Argyll. They had owned the Roxburgh plantation in Tobago. During an invasion, Archibald Stuart was killed. John Paul Jones then went on to America and to infamy as the founder of the American Navy, as I stated already. Roger Stuart's name also appears in an advert for a runaway slave. In 1779, this notice appeared in the Caledonian Mercury. It isn't clear what the circumstances of this event were, or how Stuart came into possession of this slave. Did this happen in Greenock, or while he was in Virginia? Interestingly, he is noted as an indentured servant rather than slave. It reads, 10 guineas reward, run away from his master at Greenock on the 22nd of November last, a negro lad, about 15 years of age, a stout lusty fellow, has been several voyages at sea, called Neptune. When he eloped, he was dressed in a new grey duffle coat and breeches, with a red vest and plated buckles, but which probably he may have changed. He is an excellent barber, and shaves well, and is supposed to be lurking about Edinburgh or Leith, as he told some of his acquaintances in passing through Glasgow that he was going to Dalkeith, and where it is informed he was lately seen. He is under indentures to Mr. Roger Stuart, merchant in Greenock, for 7 years from the 30th of January 1778, but as he is an artful fellow, he will give himself out for a free man. Whoever can give information of the said Neptune, so as he may be apprehended for the breach of his indentures, will receive 10 guineas of reward, by applying to Mr. Roger Stuart at Greenock, or to John Logan at Robert Sim Jr.'s, writer to the signet. No real surprise that Roger Stuart would own a slave, given his past experience of living and working in America and trading with the West Indies. Roger Stuart's name also comes up in the official town records and subsequent histories. his time as Chief Magistrate, he became known as the man behind the restoration of Fort Jervis, skirting the Bay of St. Lawrence's. Again, understandable given his mercantile interests and the politics of the time. Earlier on in the 18th century, the French had sailed up the Clyde under command of Thureau. When Thureau's little squadron was captured, which gave so much alarm to Greenock, the guns were fired as a signal for rejoicing. But during the hours of merriment, a gun unfortunately burst, which killed 2 men, and a piece of the shattered ordnance, weighing about 4 pounds, flew over the ropework and sank in the glebe, 3 feet deep. This fort continued till about 1808, bristling its loud-mouthed cannon towards the wave, but was dismantled in 1809, and in 1812 the fort, about 2 miles from the town, was erected. What gave rise to this erection was the audacity of some American cruisers coming far up the channel, and the fact of a number of merchant vessels having been captured 2 days after leaving the port. This would have been the threat of John Paul Jones. Another account relates, when the gallant and humane Frenchman Thureau entered the channel with his squadron, a universal alarm was given, not only to Greenock, but to the surrounding country, and this received a great impulse from the fact of his having captured a vessel off the Craig of Ailsa. It was at this period that a temporary fort was erected, containing 12 24-pounders, and in addition to this, brass field pieces were stationed along the road leading to the fort and on the ropework quay. It was not, however, till after the breaking out of the Revolutionary War that this place underwent a complete change, and Fort Jervis, with its magazines, was completed in 1797. Prior to this, and in 1793, Roger Stewart, who took a keen interest in the town, wrote to Lord Adam Gordon concerning the state of the battery, and to have it properly provided, and the following answer will show the manner in which these places of defence were kept up, as also the sentiments of government on this interesting subject. Sir, when batteries were erected for the protection of the different towns on the coast of Scotland, a rule was established that the guns, shot, and small stores should be furnished by the ordnance, and the powder and the expense of placing the platforms for the guns should be defrayed by the inhabitants of the towns. As this rule is still to be adhered to, I am now to desire that you will report to include the quantity of shot and small store you now have for the use of your battery, which I shall transmit to the Board of Ordnance, that whatever is wanting may be supplied by them. You will also be pleased to report to me the number and size of your guns, the quantity of gunpowder now in your possession, with the state and condition of the guns, carriages, platforms, and storehouses, that whatever articles are wanting may be provided, and repairs ordered where necessary, that your battery may be put in a proper state of defence. The fort, which was situated on what is currently now the container terminal, was dismantled in 1809 in consequence of the disturbed state of the country, by an order received from the government to the lord of the manor, and the guns were taken to Dumbarton Castle with all their mounting and the ammunition. There are some other references to Roger Stewart, and these newspaper cuttings give a brief cross-section of Roger's career. This is an advert for mahogany, which was for sale by Roger Stewart and Sons. Exposed for sale by public route on the New East Quay of Greenock on Friday the 29th current at 11 o'clock. Logs, mahogany, of large sizes and superior quality, just now landing on brig Jenny from Honduras. This, quite bizarrely, is an advert or a notice of a single potato planted this season by Captain Stewart in his farm at Stewartfield, Kilmonel in Argyllshire, which produced upwards of 38 pounds. One of the roots weighed 1 pound and 6 ounces and was many of them above a pound. The potato was cut into 11 pieces, all of which grew. A veritable variorum piece that is. And this is the notice of two young women who were charged with breaking into his counting house. Janet Alexander and Elizabeth Livingston, accused of breaking into the counting house of Messrs Roger Stewart and Sons, merchants in Greenock, and stealing therefrom a guinea note of the Renfrewshire Banking Company, 3 shillings in silver, 3 in copper, a miniature ship made of wood, and other things. And they pleaded guilty of the theft, but not guilty of housebreaking. Livingston was terribly agitated, repeatedly said it was her first offence, and was absorbed in tears. The Advocate Depute gave up that part of the charge, housebreaking, and the jury returned a verdict, finding them guilty on their own confession, and after a suitable advice they were sentenced to be confined and kept at hard labour in the Bridewell of Paisley for the space of 1 3/4 months? No, 12 months, sorry. Roger Stewart's family. Much like his contemporary Duncan Darroch of Gourock, Roger bought commissions in the army for 2 of his sons, starting a long tradition of military service. His other sons were involved in business or in the ministry. George Stewart. In 1805, one of Roger's ships, the Helena, presumably named after his daughter, was captured by French privateers on its way to Barbados. They fought for over an hour, and the ship was captained by George Stewart, the son of Roger. This would make George 19 years old. He certainly had an adventurous but brief life. George was killed at the Battle of the Neve in 1813. This is the memorial stone in the midkirk. Upon the 9th of December 1813, and in the 27th year of his age, George Stewart of Stewartfield, captain in the 42nd Regiment of Foot, fell in front of Bayonne in the Kingdom of France, gloriously fighting for the independence of Europe. Endeared to all those with whom he had ever associated, and distinguished in a corps in which the ordinary virtues of a soldier command no preeminence, his remains were consigned to an honourable grave in a foreign land, and the companies and the companions of his early life have raised this memorial to his name in his native town. Apparently there is another memorial to George at Ronican Farm. I haven't been able to see this, or don't know if it exists, but if anybody knows different, please get in touch. Roger Stewart Jr. Roger Stewart Jr. fought at Waterloo as an ensign with the 42nd Black Watch. He died in 1833. This is the Stewart Memorial Stone in Inverkip Street Graveyard. On the left is another one of Roger's sons, the Reverend John Stewart of Liberton, previously mentioned as being in the crew of one of Roger's ships. He provides an interesting note in the history of the Catholic Church in Greenock. In correspondence with George Williamson, he wrote that the Reverend Louis Capron, aged French teacher, was a frequent guest at the house of his father, Mr. Roger Stewart, and was much respected by him. It is said that he moved to Paisley, where he said Mass till the arrival of the first resident priest. He must have returned to Greenock, where he died in October 1805, as appears by the following tribute to his memory in the local newspaper. Died here on the 27th, the Reverend Louis Capron, aged 50, a French emigrant, after a residence in the town of several years. If integrity and goodness of heart, in union with gentle and amiable manners, constitute the true dignity and excellence of man, Mr. Capron will long live in the memory of his numerous friends and acquaintances. John Stewart married Mary Gamel, the daughter of Lieutenant General Andrew Gamel, who was the son of the Greenock merchant James Gamel, who built Garville House. The East India Harbour occupies a place where once was the sandy bay of St. Lawrence, and this designation it received from the old chapel that stood in the vicinity. About the year 1760, the chapel here was in good state of preservation, but no particular information seems to have been handed down regarding it. It was demolished about 100 years ago, written in 1880, but the name of St. Lawrence was given to the chapel that was erected not far from the site of the old one. The original chapel stood on the site at the west corner of Virginia Street, which belonged to the heirs of Roger Stuart. When the foundations of his house were being laid, a number of human bones were found, which indicates that a burying ground must have been attached to the chapel. This is a note about Daniel Macfarlane, the grammar school master, taken from notes from George Williamson and his letters and correspondence with John Stuart. Mr. Macfarlane used often, 2 or 3 times a week, to drink tea at my father's house, and after tea play cards with my father, Mr. McLachlan of the chapel, and Mr. Capron, the French teacher, and when either of them was absent, with my 2 eldest sisters, who were, with their father, first-rate whist players. They were always seemingly very happy, and often remained to supper. Baillie Stuart's house was in the immediate vicinity of the chapel, as well as the Royal Closs, in which the French master had his classroom. Mr. Macfarlane was appointed by the Town Council on the 29th of October 1794, and on the 5th of November in the same year he secured the appointment of Session Clerk of the new parish, in succession to Mr. Pagan, who had resigned in consequence of ill health. Mr. Stuart was at this time Chief Magistrate, and no doubt the election was brought about through his influence. Baillie Stuart was a son of the manse, his father having been Minister of Kilmorey and Arran, and had doubtless received testimonials in Mr. Macfarlane's favour, and carried the council with him. Daniel Macfarlane was the elder of the 2 sons of John Macfarlane, a feuar in Callander. The frieze you see here below is in a corridor in the Watt Library, and shows Mr. Brown, or Dr. Brown, who was quite an eminent headmaster of the grammar school. James Stuart became a very successful cotton merchant in Mobile, Alabama. From its establishment in the early 18th century, Mobile developed into the largest slave trading centre in the Deep South, and James must have been part of this. Its strategic port location facilitated both domestic trafficking and the illegal international smuggling of enslaved people. The brutal trade permeated all aspects of Mobile society. There were slave auctions, and warehouses and brokers dominated the downtown area, and merchant cities and officials profited immensely from slavery. Slaves eventually comprised 43% of the city's population at its peak in the 1850s. Another son, Andrew, moved to Alabama with his family. He would return to Greenock to take over the Greenock side of the business. He did, however, leave his children there to run the American side. This is their home in Alabama. Andrew's son, Roger, there are a few Rogers, died aged 35 in 1858 of alcoholism. He owned 5 slaves personally and ran several slave houses. It was reported that he held yearly galas where he toasted the Queen. The Stuart House is now part of Spring Hill College campus and is used as a wedding venue. Andrew Stuart gave this commemorative silver horn to Alfred Snowfield, the first captain of their ship, the Roger Stuart. Andrew was in business with and related by marriage to James Reed, Scottish cotton merchant in Alabama. Andrew died in 1833. Descendants include a Confederate major in the Civil War, a mayor of Savannah, and the wife of Stuart Houston, an American steel magnate who owned the Coatesville Steelworks in Pennsylvania. This is Terracina in Coates, Pennsylvania, the house of the Roger Stuart's daughter who married the steel magnate. Roger Stuart had 3 daughters, Helena, Margaret, and Elizabeth. Helena married the lawyer James Turner. She'd been born in 1801. Turner was quite famous in Greenock for being the man in charge of the legal side of the Glasgow, Paisley and Glasgow Railway. Roger's eldest daughter, Elizabeth, married Captain John Fullerton of Kilmichael in Arran, obviously a local connection. He was the commander of a revenue cutter based in Campbelltown. Here is a short piece on Campbelltown. It was a curious little town and had a wonderful variety of character in its society and customs. No fewer than 7 large revenue cutters had their headquarters in Campbelltown and were commanded by naval officers who in the good old days received a pay which would startle modern economists. These cutters were powerful vessels, generally manned by a double crew and each having a smaller craft acting as tender. The officers and men of the cutters made Campbelltown their home, and villas, generally built opposite the buoy which marked the anchorage of their respective cruisers, were occupied by the families of the different commanders, and the element thus introduced into the society of the town had many important effects. It not only gave cheerfulness to its tone, but added a flavour of the sea to its interests. The merits of each officer and cutter were matters with which every man and woman, but especially every boy, was familiar with, and how old Jack Fullerton had carried on till all seemed going by the board on a coast bristling with sunken rocks, or how Captain Beatson had been caught off the Mull in the great January gale, and with what skill he had weathered that wild headland, were questions which every inhabitant, old and young, had repeatedly discussed. The Fullertons built Rosemount at Low Ascomel in Campbelltown, shown here. Incidentally, Fullerton's brother, the Lieutenant Colonel James, fought at Waterloo. Another daughter, Margaret, married another revenue cutter commander, Henry Dundas Beatson. We shall meet the Beatsons again. There is a note, seen here. On Monday morning, the 12th, His Majesty's revenue cutter, the Melville Castle, Captain Henry Dundas Beatson, commander, on a cruise from this port to Dublin, was put into Campbelltown harbour after having been blown out of Dublin Bay on the preceding Friday night, when he encountered a most severe gale of wind on the coast of Ireland, which continued till Sunday morning, whereby her guns and part of her cargo of bombshells that he was carrying to Dublin were obliged to be thrown overboard, and it was with great difficulty that the vessel was saved. This is an image of the Roger Stuart mentioned previously. This was owned by Andrew Stuart, a grandson of Roger and son of Roger, of Andrew Sr. They set up their business from Virginia Street, running chartering ships to various parts of the world. This is Gershom Stuart, 1857 to 1929, a Unionist MP for the Wirral. He was Roger's great-grandson and son of Andrew. He had a business in Hong Kong and was responsible for founding the Hong Kong Golf Club. And back home he started the tournament that would be known as the Walker Cup. His parents were Andrew Stuart and Margaret Leach. The Leaches were quite famous in town. In December of 1857, in Greenock, on the south bank of the River Clyde, a boy was born who would etch his name into the history of Hoylake and who would play a pivotal role in the transporting of the royal and ancient game to Asia. His name has understandably been overshadowed by the greats that line the oak-panelled walls at the Royal Liverpool Golf Club, but he was a golfing pioneer nonetheless. That bonny lad was Gershom Stuart. The young Gersham's stay in Scotland was to be a mere sojourn, for he was moved to Merseyside on the Wirral Peninsula early in his boyhood. It was during this period that he first picked up a set of brass heads and wandered the linksland around the racecourse at Hoylake. From a young age he was characterised as a stranger in a foreign land, a facet perhaps of his character which pushed him towards an apprenticeship with the British East India Company in Liverpool. Young Gershom desired to travel. Shortly thereafter, in 1883, he took up a brokerage role at the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank and set sail with his clubs via the newly opened Suez Canal to the Pearl of the Orient, Hong Kong. For the first 6 years of his stay in Hong Kong, it is likely his hickories were just one of two sets in the entire colony. Alas, they were collecting dust. Amid the bustle of colonial life and with nowhere to play, Stuart grew restless and could only yearn for a swift round at his beloved Hoylake. He was known to frequent the racecourse at Happy Valley and hit balls upon turf that was primarily used by the British military as a parade ground for drills and ceremonies. The land was shared amongst polo, football and hockey interests. After deciding to quit from the HSBC, Gershom returned to Hoylake briefly in 1888 before setting up as an independent finance broker in Hong Kong. In May 1889, the wheel started to turn. Gershom had finally whispered his longings for golf in the right ears, notably the golfing battalion of the Royal and Southern Highlanders. Stubborn, he published a notice in the Hong Kong Daily Press that month stating, "Gentlemen interested in the royal and ancient game of golf are requested to attend a meeting to be held in the Hong Kong Club on Friday the 10th of May 1889 at 5 p.m. to consider the question of starting a golf links in the Hong Kong or Kowloon." The meeting, held at the exclusive Hong Kong Club, was attended by 13 distinguished men, notably Robert Murray Rumsey, retired naval justice, and Sir Thomas Jackson, chief manager of the HSBC. The attendees voted in favour of the formation of the Hong Kong Golf Club and immediately began to lay out a 9-hole links at the Happy Valley racecourse. It was during this period that Gershom firmly stamped his fingerprint on the game of golf. In 1921, immediately before the Amateur Championship at Hoylake, Gershom, as noted by a contemporary article in the Times, facilitated a match between the visiting Americans and the leading British players of the day. Amongst a host of others, Tommy Armour, Ernest Holderness, Chick Evans, William Clark Fownes, Bobby Jones and Francis Ouimet came along. The visitors, as they annoyingly often do, won the match 9-3. It was such a success that a match was played again immediately the following year at the National Golf Links of America. This was the first official rendition of the Walker Cup. As a little aside, let's look at the business connections of Andrew Stuart with the Johnson family. Adam was the collector of customs in Greenock, and Johnson Street is named after him. Adam's wife was Susanna Simpson, whose father was Archibald Simpson, a minister at Port Glasgow Parish Church, and he had immigrated to South Carolina where he set up the Salkehatchie Presbyterian Church. Their only son, Archibald Simpson Johnson, 1784 to 1819, died at Roslyn Plantation, Collection County, South Carolina. He had two sons who were in business together. One was Alexander, known as Kentucky Johnson, pictured left, and the other was Archibald, who ran a wholesale dry goods business in Charleston. His archives note that 9 of his slaves had run away. Their names were Peter, Adam, Abraham, Greenock, Geoffrey, Moses, Glasgow and John. Alexander ran the Greenock side of the business and wrote quite often to his brother regarding the state of business in Charleston. This is an image of Archibald Johnson with an advert that was placed for a runaway slave. This is the memorial stone to Archibald Simpson Johnson. On his death in 1893, it was reported, for many years one of the leading merchants and financiers of this city died here today with an illness of 2 weeks. After an illness of 2 weeks, he was 82 years old. He was for many years leading member of the dry goods house of Johnson, Cruise and Company, and one time served as alderman of the city under the first Democratic administration of Reconstruction. He was imprisoned by the federal government after the war at Charleston for refusing to divulge secrets of the Bee Importing and Exporting Company, a concern engaged during the war in blockade running. Interesting that Greenock was intimately linked with the blockade running for the South in the Civil War. I wonder if he used any of his connections there. This is Dr. John Somers Boost, who was married to a sister of Archibald and Alexander. He was a member of the German artillery of the Hampton Legion. He was the surgeon of the unit intended to Lieutenant Rudolph Siegling at the Second Battle of Manassas in the Civil War. While attending to Siegling's wounds, an exploding shell covered both of them with dirt. Siegling was thought to have been mortally wounded from a previous shell and was initially reported dead. He received a stomach wound, and it was felt he would not survive the night, but did, and participated in the battle the following day, even though he was in a serious condition. He had graduated from Charleston College and the Medical College of South Carolina, and he had attended lectures at the University of Berlin, Paris, and London. He was a surgeon in the Confederate States Army and the Army of the Northern Virginia. This is Omar ibn Said, who wrote the only known surviving autobiography written in Arabic by an enslaved person in the United States. By 1807, South Carolina planters had pushed their luck. Due to their gluttony for slaves, Congress had passed a law that would ban the importing of new African captives. At year's end, the door would slam shut. That launched a frenzied race to fill the final slave voyages. Ships lined up along the West Africa's coast. Among the key ports was St. Louis, at the mouth of the Senegal River, a liquid highway for commerce, including gold and slaves. That put villages like Omar's at particular risk. Futa Toro hugs the Senegal River for 250 miles, and raiders often plundered its banks. Omar was born there at a time of upheaval. As he stepped off the ship, inhaling the humid air of this new world, Omar surely was naked and chained. He carried only the Quran stored in his mind's eye. Then a puny, weak, wicked little man named Johnston bought me. He was a big disbeliever and did not fear Allah at all, Omar wrote. Omar didn't include Johnston's first name or describe the plantation he owned, but coastal South Carolina was notorious for its rice operations where enslaved labourers often died young. About 4 years after disembarking in Charleston, Omar fled. Given the risks, most people who attempted to escape were men in their 20s, but fear drove him. I was afraid to stay with such a wicked little man who committed a lot of sins, he wrote, so I escaped. I know it's a bit of a stretch to think that this Johnson would have been our Johnson, the Greenock Johnson, but you never know. And so, to the Beatson connection. We have seen that Henry Dundas Beatson was a partner with Roger Stewart. His son, also Henry, was given command of a revenue cutter in the fight against smuggling and would marry Roger's daughter Margaret in 1808, as we have seen, living in Campbelltown. This is the family gravestone of Captain Henry Dundas Beatson and his wife Margaret Stewart. The Beatson and Stewart connection were intimately linked with the military service over the years. A son, Roger Stewart Beatson, was a Major General in the Royal Engineers. His grandson, Lieutenant Roger Stewart Montessor Beatson, was killed in their Free Corps in 1916. This is the obituary for Major General John Fullerton Beatson. Surgeon General John Fullerton Beatson. He was the Surgeon General of Her Majesty's Indian Forces, and he was born on the 11th of March 1818, possibly in Greenock, Scotland. He was the son of Captain Henry Dundas Beatson and Margaret Stewart. Another son, George Stewart Beatson, graduated in Arts and Medicine from the University of Glasgow in 1836. In 1838 he joined the Army Medical Department and did duty on the staff in Ceylon from 1839 to 1851. He was surgeon to the 51st Foot in the Second Burmese War and subsequently served at Quilali Hospital in Turkey during the Crimean War. He became Surgeon General in 1863 and was appointed Principal Medical Officer of European troops in India, an appointment which he held for the customary 5 years. For the next 3 years, he was in medical charge of the Royal Victoria Hospital, Netley, and in 1871 was appointed Principal Medical Officer in India for the second time. At Netley, he would have known Lady Shaw Stewart, who was appointed as the senior nursing officer. She was a friend of Florence Nightingale and had served in Crimea as well. Margaret and Henry's grandson was Colonel Sir George Thomas Beatson, 1848 to 1933. He was a British physician and pioneer in the field of oncology, developing a new treatment for breast cancer. The Beatson West of Scotland Cancer Centre and the Cancer Research UK Beatson Institute are named after him. And so we return to Virginia Street. The shipping company of A.G. Kidston had their offices on Virginia Street. The Kidstons went on to be a very successful company, with the children becoming owners of the Clyde Shipping Company, and one of the sons living at Finlayson in Langbank. The railway brought significant change to the area. In the 1840s, the railway goods yard was built on the ground adjacent to where the house was, and Duncan Nicol, coal merchant, took over the yard of Andrew Stewart in 1859. A variety of warehouses and workshops were situated here over the years, and Farrie's sugar refinery was close by in Bogle Street. The coming of the railways in 1840 leads us to talk about another Greenock company, Caird. In 1838, John Scott Russell, the civil engineer, naval architect and shipbuilder, was employed at the small Greenock shipyard of Thomson and Spears, where he introduced his waveline system to a series of Royal Mail ships, together with many other innovations. He seems to have lived in Virginia House as well as the Glen on Finnart Street. He worked with James Tennant Caird. Caird initially built railway locomotives at the top of Virginia Street, and there was a tank built there for the naval design experiments. In 1885, the Greenock Telegraph reported, Mr. James Tennant Caird, we are all of us proud of our noble river. In point of beauty, we believe it to be unsurpassed among the rivers of the world. It has another high distinction. Owing to its unrivalled command of iron and of coal, and of brains to use them, there has up its banks grown the second city of the empire. Great Britain is the principal carrier of the sea. The half of our iron ships she gets from the Clyde. Among our industries, marine engineering holds high place. The men who first built iron vessels on our river are deserving of remembrance. Honourable distinction is due to the firm of Caird and Co. of Greenock, of which James Tennant Caird has long been the respected principal. Mr. Caird was born at Cowglen near Pollokshaws in 1816. Like so many Scotchmen who have done good work in their day, all the education he received was at the parish school. His grandfather, by whom he was reared, seeing the bent of the boy's mind, apprenticed him at the age 14 to Messrs. Caird and Company, engineers in Greenock. He was distantly related to the senior partner of the firm, who was the father of the present principal Caird. After serving his apprenticeship with the idea of gaining wider experience and more complete insight into land engine practice, the man went to the Rollocks Engine Works in Glasgow, and thence to Randolph, Elliott and Co., who were extensive millwrights, and the forerunners of John Elder and Co. About 1838 he returned at their own instance to the service of Caird and Co., and after occupying the position of head draftsman for several years, he was appointed assistant manager under Mr. Muir, the managing partner. The firm at that time consisted of Messrs. Muir, Balderston and Captain Miller. The death of Mr. Muir, which took place shortly afterwards, Caird was appointed manager and admitted as partner. Mr. Balderson having retired, Mr. Caird and Captain Miller became the sole representatives of the firm. Their business originally was a general one, but they devoted special attention to the fitting up of sugar refining machinery and also to locomotives. The late John Scott Russell was for many years with Mr. Caird in the business of the firm. The two were fast and lifelong friends. That time the line between Glasgow and Greenock was in course of construction, the contractor being Mr. Brassey, the father of the present Sir Thomas Brassey, first Secretary to the Admiralty, and Caird and Co. built the first locomotive that ran on the rails. When testing it between Greenock and the mouth of the tunnel, the two friends had a narrow escape. Mr. Caird drove it on the up journey, Scott Russell on the down, and a horse happening to get on the line was caused an accident which upset the engine and threw off the two drivers. While picking himself up, Scott Russell quietly remarked to James, "It wasn't me who did that." Another occasion, the two friends were out trying small steamer very early in the morning when part of the machinery gave way and tore a hole in the ship's bottom. To their great alarm, the pair found that they had no boat on board, and but for a tug which saw their distress and came to the rescue, they would probably have gone down with the ship, which sank before reaching the harbour. Pictured here is Thomas Brassey, who was the railway contractor responsible for the Glasgow-Greenock Railway, and he was also the engineer responsible for the proposed Eastern Harbour, as it's shown on this 1842 map, which would become the Victoria Harbour. Scott Russell leased Virginia House in 1841, and as earlier said, erected an experimental tank in the grounds of the house. Pictured here is the Great Eastern, and on the left is Russell, on the left of the photograph, and Kingdom Brunel second from the right. So we hear about Virginia Street again in the 1903 James Watt Memorial Plans. And at one point it was suggested that an experimental ship's tank be built in his memory. This wasn't received particularly well, but it raised a few interesting historical snippets about Virginia Street. The Telegraph, 1903. I observe your issue of the letter from the Honourable J.C. Burns suggesting the form the Carnegie gift should take. A tank for model steamers on the Clyde, upper reaches I presume, he means. This cannot be considered at all here or anywhere. I may remind the younger generation that Scott Russell had won when he resided in Virginia House here. The avenue to the house was the head of Virginia Street, the gate which was the south side of Chapel Street. The tank was on the right-hand side going towards the house, and the modelling house on the left, halfway up, and was entered through the house, which was one of the entrances to his large garden, which ran along Chapel Street to Dellingburn Square, enclosed by high walls. The only one of the modellers I remember now was Alan Cameron, afterwards boat builder in East Blackhall Street. There he got his first lesson and taste for the trade. John Scott may remember something about it, although I am not quite sure he was at his apprenticeship at this date. If this catches his eye, he may give you details of the great work carried on there. Another letter from 1903. Sir, permit me to say a word in favour of the tank proposal, which in my opinion is one which, if could be carried out on a satisfactory financial basis, would entail no charge upon the municipal rates and would be of immense benefit as an educative medium to apprentice engineers and shipyard employees, giving them a strong pull over the competitors who had trusted book-taught theories only. And being the case, what better scheme can be advised to perpetuate Watt's memory in such a satisfying way, such as Dr. Carnegie desiderates? Apart from such considerations, it is not too much to say that possibly if such a tank had been in existence this quarter during the past dozen so, some poor souls who are sleeping the sleep that knows no waking at the bottom of the sea might have been in the land of the living today. I don't know anything about Mr. John Scott Russell's tank at Virginia House, but as a schoolboy I helped him test his models on a trough at Glen House when he resided there. This cutting is a notice of the anniversary in which John Scott Russell was invited to talk to the Philosophical Society in celebration of James Watt's birthday. This map shows the East Harbour built, the Victoria Harbour, and the goods station built beyond Chapel Street. This insurance map of the 1860s, I think, shows Virginia Street at the bottom and just details what was the majority of buildings in that area, small machine works, warehouses, etc. Again, more detail from this map. Virginia Street leading down to the East Harbour, and Chapel Street with the coal yard, the Cathcart Street station, and the goods yard. To the 20th century. I'll finish off with a selection of images of Virginia Street and the surrounding area. Rouen Street, Bogle Street, Chapel Street. This area has undergone substantial change over the years. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. The next time you shop at Morrison's, you can perhaps imagine walking through the graveyard of St. Lawrence's as you walk down aisles for milk and bread. Equally, the next time you're at the fair, or walk beside the harbours, or take the opportunity to eat or drink at the tail of the bank, that little piece of tarmac called Virginia Street you walk down might make you pause to think about the footsteps of time, or the footsteps of Roger Stewart and his family, and how they influenced the growth of Greenock and had an imprint in so many areas of history. Or, as Greenock-born Al Stewart might say, I felt the beat of my mind go drifting into time passages. This has been a production of Cartspun Publications. If you're interested in finding out more about what we do, visit our website at www.cartspunpublishing.com or check out our Facebook pages, and we're also on Blue Sky.